this evening. Apparently tax policy is not as attractive as we had thought. Nonetheless, we are thrilled to have the 9 of you here this evening. Be aware we are recording this. It will go up on YouTube in a couple of days. So be cautious in your comments. I normally introduce dignitaries. It's a small group this evening, but having a council member here, even as the presenter, is still worth noting. So Kevin, thank you. Upcoming forums. A week from tonight, we will hear from Matthew Ridgway, who is one of our attendees this evening, and Otto Condon, talking about a proposed cooperative project in Petaluma, co-op housing. One of the first times co-op housing has been proposed in Petaluma. It should be an interesting conversation. I think a number of city folks will be joining in because they want to learn more about it. So hope you can come back next week. 2 weeks after that, October 21, a group called Vesta Pacific out of San Diego. It has a proposed compact development on Petaluma Boulevard South, all residential, but a variety of housing types, really a quite creative layout they'll be presenting to Know Before You Grow. For those of you who are new, and I know that's not many, but just for the heck of it, the mission statement of Know Before You Grow has 4 columns to it: housing to meet community needs, transportation, particularly less car-dependent transportation options, climate action, and sustainable municipal finance. I saved that last one to the end because tonight is sort of about that sustainable municipal finance. When we made that a pillar of Know Before You Grow, it was more with the hope of come up with land use patterns, density, fewer roads, less traffic, where the numbers truly did make sense for a city without having, just sort of normally the cost of maintaining a dense city is much less than a sprawling city. The goal was certainly not to get into tax increases. On the other hand, we have been so slow in converting to a dense city that a tax increase becomes a necessary step to keep us afloat and hopefully give us the impetus toward that dense, municipally sustainable city. So with that introduction, Kevin, the floor is yours. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you in the mailer and flyer for this event, giving me credit as the initial chair of Know Before You Grow. That's generous. I remembered as we were both chairs at that time, and it's a good place for the public to get more news than they get out of City Hall directly, and I think that mission is so necessary. I've thrown my hat in tonight to try and be the lead spokesperson for the campaign for Measure U, the City of Petaluma's tax initiative on this year's ballot. So to explain that, I'd like to pull up my PowerPoint, as anyone would on a Zoom call, right? And share my screen. Let's see if I can do that as quickly as I hoped.
While Kevin is doing that, one housekeeping note is that I'm kind of proactively muting people in the background. It's nothing personal. If you find you need to talk, unmute yourself. Over to you, Kevin.
All right. So what PowerPoint shouldn't start with a beautiful photograph, right? Petaluma is a special place, but right now our financial situation is vulnerable and has been for years. We've seen it coming, and now it's time to take matters and get things done. The agenda for tonight is kind of a story to tell you how we got here, what the steps were to get into a mess, and also what it takes to get out of a mess. And we'll review all the parts of revenue and expense. And the bottom line, though, is that Petaluma's revenues don't meet the community's needs. They don't meet the basic expenses. And so many ways you'll be able to identify with that. And so let me just start where the story starts. In the budget this year, this is a page from the budget, and every slide I'm going to show you is a slide that was shown at a city council meeting or a finance workshop that were noticed to the public. The city has tried to be particularly transparent and particularly outward facing with improved communications over the last 2 years. I have to say, the first thing that happened when I took my seat as city council 2 years ago is they called us in a room and said, the finances are worse than you thought. worse than the public knows. And even during that campaign, all the candidates agreed that there was a revenue problem, not a expenditure problem. And that phrase was coined by my friend Dennis Pozike, who now is a strong supporter of Measure U. But this year we balance out our budget. Next year, we don't. We're $5 million in the hole. And that's right here where my cursor's in the center there. $5 million next year, over a budget of $50 million. It's a 10% deficit next year. And as you move out into future years, 5.9, 6.5, it adds up to an average of 6.4 over the next couple of years. So what to do about that? Well, let me go back here. What we're forecasting here is the general fund part of our budget. The city budget has many components. A nice piece for the Argus explaining how the city's budget works. I'm sure you all remember it in detail. And probably eyes glazed over trying to read a budget document in paper as well as they do on PowerPoint. So yeah, we wrote that to explain how different parts of the budget work in a city municipal budget. General fund is where our deficit is. Now, the city budget is broken into several major pieces. One of them is general fund there in the blue, and that's a $50 million piece of the budget. That's a quarter of the budget. And then the utilities, the water utilities and things like that, now they have their own water bill. You really don't have to worry about them right now because their rates, water rates, sewer rates, pay for what they're trying to do. So at capital projects, that's money that comes in from the state for tax grant money, things like that. All those projects go into that pool, and those are outside funds. Special revenues, same things. That's impact fee generated improvements that we can spend in the city. So what we're worried about is that blue section, the general fund, because it has no outside source other than the existing sales tax that helps pay for that. But in general fund, what is the general fund? What departments, what services are in general fund? When you look at the slice of the pie here, the general fund, and you see police at 41% of this budget, fire for 31% of this budget. So 72% of this budget is in the police and fire. And the reason it's so large is because over the years, as they've cut budget, they've more cut in public works or more cut in parks, reducing those segments, leaving what's left as city budget to be predominantly police and fire. So what we're saying here now is that this deficit is going to get borne on the backs of these departments, general fund departments. So how did we get to this place? Well, historically, it starts, as everything in California does, with Prop 13. And when Prop 13 went through, Petaluma prided itself in having a low tax basis, and the structure of Prop 13 allowed them to have a lower tax basis going forward than other cities. So it's not every city is treated the same under Prop 13. And Petaluma is treated particularly poorly. Also, 6 of the 9 cities in Sonoma County already have sales tax add-on like Petaluma is proposing tonight on this Measure U. Petaluma has no sales tax add-on and hasn't. In 2014, they placed it on the budget, but the council wasn't unanimous on whether it was a good idea or not. When you have a split council, certainly the public doesn't rally behind a cause. So we have none, though we've known that we needed one. We also don't have a utility user tax. And I mentioned that 6 of the 9 cities already have sales tax. One of them, from one of the 3, has a utility tax. So basically 7 of 9 have additional support for city funding. More and more, the storm drain requirements to keep the bay clean are creating a new utility called storm drain, but there's no billing for that. There's no revenue for that. So that has been a general fund requirement, sort of an unfunded mandate coming from Regional Water Quality Control Board for good projects to help keep minimize erosion, minimize problems in the bay, but without a revenue source. So all the other departments give up money so that we can fill this mandate.
Hey, Kevin,
Yo,
I didn't mean to apologize, except somehow there seems to be a bust in the link that was in the email. I don't understand why. I guess it was my mistake. I've gotten several emails from folks looking for a link. I'm sending it to them as quick as I can. You may get 3 or 4 or 5 more listeners here in a few minutes. If you want to go slow or back up a little bit. Again, hate to interrupt you, but I know you want to talk to as many people as possible.
Yeah. Dave, if I may add, that was the reason I was on both computers. My one computer went through, but this computer it asked for a code number to get in.
I'm hearing that message from others. Marja Tar is coming on. I see the mayor just arrived. Yeah. So I assume it was my mistake. I apologize to those folks. Kevin, do what you wish. My apologies.
well, I hate to bore those who've been here for the first couple of slides, but I think it's fundamental to the presentation that we get started at the beginning for folks. I'll go a little faster, but nonetheless, starting at the beginning seems to be a good place to start. Well, if we don't have any new participants, I'll jump back in. Let me just recap as I go forward from this screen. And now, why are we not going forward? Okay, so let's see. We talked about Petaluma has certain revenue realities. The reality is we do not have as much money coming in as the citizens require in services. We talked about the general fund. The general fund is approximately a $50 million enterprise, and it will be $5 million short, 10% short this coming fiscal year. It kind of doesn't matter who your favorite candidate is. Without this measure, they will be deciding where to make cuts in the budget, and 10% is deep cuts. General fund, again, as we mentioned, is just one part of the city. All the other funds, except general fund, have independent monies. They can't wash between departments. So you can't take general fund money and put it into utilities, but more the issue is you can't take water bill money and put it into general fund. The general fund is dominated by police and fire. And the reason that's true is because they've cut parks, cut public works, cut so many other city services down to the bone. They've also cut police and fire to the bone, but they dominate this area. So they, in a reduced budget, they will suffer the greatest. We talked a little bit about Prop 13 and how it was uneven playing field. Petaluma's field is the worst field. We talked about sales tax, that 6 of 9 cities have existing sales tax and have for years. 5 of them are coming up for renewal this time. They've been on their ballot so long they're renewing. And a 7th city is adding on a utility tax, where Petaluma doesn't have a utility tax, doesn't have an added sales tax. So we talked about storm drain mandates, putting an increased budget demand on the city. And we were right at the point where we were talking about transit occupancy tax. And our transit occupancy tax is lower than other cities. And we just addressed this 2 years ago. And it's still lower, but it also is not of a magnitude that can really put a dent in what's going on. We get the second lowest amount of tax revenue of any in the county. And this is all historical decisions that have brought us to the revenue side of what's going on here. Okay, people say, well, what about property tax? You know, property tax, it mainly goes to the state. And let's see, why did I lose those other little, there we go. Schools get 50% and Sonoma County gets the big chunk. That's a glitch in my slide. So, but the city only gets 11 cents out of that dollar of your property tax. In the existing sales tax, the way a sales tax works, the state of California, well, the Sonoma County sales tax rate right now, base rate is 8.25. That's what's the base rate. Everybody has that, and then some have more. But of that 8.25, the state gets The countywide initiatives like Open Space Parks, Library, Sonoma County Transportation Authority, and SMART, they take up a penny and a quarter. And what's left for the city of Petaluma is 1 penny. And that's about $13 million. You'll see that come up again because that's the amount we need to double in our presentation. But it's the sales tax money doesn't stay in town. 1 cent does, and 6 of it to the state. So other cities, though, have addressed this by having additional sales tax on here. So these were the 6 cities that I mentioned earlier: Rohnert Park with a 1/2 cent and Healdsburg with a 1/2 cent. And right now, these 1, 2, and 3 here are being renewed this year until ended by voter. And that's the phrase that Petaluma uses in its measure. Santa Rosa, which has 3/4 cent already, is just extending it by 10 years. And people say, why have it for only 10 years? Why not have it for 10 years? Isn't that a more cautious thing to do? Well, Petaluma's financial problem is structural. It won't change, and we feel that we have taken the expenses to the minimum by cuts over the past years. So it would be disingenuous to say you could reduce it after 10 years or not extend after 10 years. So these are the cities that already have measures in place. And here is the utility tax I mentioned for Cloverdale, leaving Windsor and Petaluma. And just as an aside, throwing some credit to know before you grow, that financial sustainability tax basis we talk about, the bill is coming due on Petaluma for its sprawl and low tax evaluation building style. Windsor, a newer city, doesn't see that yet, whereas these older cities all see that. We'll see that in Windsor as time progresses, and I'm sure that'll be a future know before you grow topic. So the strategy to date, well, I mean, in 2008, it was apparent that the city was in crisis financially. And so through 2012, it was just address the crisis. And then it didn't get better after 2012. We were in survival mode. So all the major cuts were made starting in 2008 and running right up to now. And the city started in 2019 with a sustainability planning to figure out how to stabilize the revenue versus expenditure problem. And what did that look like? Well, the first thing is to have the goal. And the goal is now to achieve a strategic balance of available long-term revenue with an agreed upon service level. And the problem here is you need to have an agreed upon. This requires community consultation, and it requires input and listening to people within the city. So the city put together a work plan. Their FOS is Financial and Operational Sustainability Work Plan. In December 2019, after a lot of effort at staff time, they started rolling it out to the public in December. And each of these was a step in being able to explain all of the issues to the public. These were workshops, city council meetings, et cetera. Then COVID hit, and some of these didn't get their fair review in public. But all of the analysis was done, and the idea of what it takes to be a financially sustainable expense and a financially sustainable revenue picture worked on. First thing, make sure you're not spending too much. In the period 2008 to 12, city reduced 1/3 of all staff. I mean, that's a frightening number to me, but that's what the city had to do to get through that financial crisis. Another challenging part for me to come to grips with is no salary increases from 2009 to 2017. How do you retain an employee if you don't give them annual cost of living? And this is an embarrassment that our city is in this shape. So there, the blue dot in the middle, the legally allowable pension reform was undertaken. We will look at that in a moment, but proactively by the city as well as with the assistance of state mandate. And the city aggressively outsourced anything it could to reduce its overhead and pension liability here. All departments were consolidated there. So this is the next step. After they got to that lowest budget, then they said they must balance every year. And after that part, the state came in with a PEPRA program that has to do with public employee retirement benefits, adjusting. So now we have tiered employment in the city, that people who are hired new do not get anything like the kind of pension benefit that the classic or older employees do. And we've done everything we'll come to a slide on pensions in a second. But we also were unable to invest general fund money into roads and infrastructure. And that's how we ended up with the worst roads in the whole 9 Bay Area, ABAG, MTC region. We are categorically ranked the worst in pavement index in the 9 Bay Area counties. We also have invested very little in technology on so many fronts. You think of technology perhaps as a singular computer, but it hits every bit of the city business, and there's been no funds to invest and keep up with how industry has changed. So let's see, we'll move on to the next one. So right now we're still at 48 general fund positions, fewer than the 2008 levels, employment levels. That means the city is getting what it is getting done with a lot less workers. But people realize that that's not the best employment environment for employees. So we lose employees and we have to retrain new employees, and that's an expense. So not paying competitive wages is expensive. So in the policing programs, we've lost a number of programs that that our officers can do that are different than patrol. And one of them, just in particular, is the homeless outreach, where the host program, you can have a homeless professional person working with an officer to determine what really needs to happen when you're engaging one of these situations in response to a call out. Our emergency response times have slowed for our all our safety workers. These are just things that, a community, they're trends that a community is declining and not being sustainable. Blue dot in the middle is the police and fire stations. One of my biggest concerns here is that all the fire stations have been deemed seismically unstable. They're not up to code. And in an earthquake, the potential to collapse. Now, if the emergency vehicles are in the building that collapses on them, that's bad emergency response. So certainly our fire station, downtown fire station, which is historical and well-loved, it is coming to a day where it needs new investment. And beyond that on the fire stations is we do not have adequate facilities to have co-ed firefighter facilities. We do not have, so when we are fortunate enough to be competitive to employ a female firefighter, it's not the best environment for their working conditions, and we are not competitive with areas that can provide the right kind of facilities, have the right environment for all employees. So these are main things we can hit on, talk longer, or come back in the questions period. But pensions, people are very concerned about pensions. And like I mentioned, salaries were frozen in 2009. So that really drives down the amount that a pension is if you don't give employees raises over the years. Further, the city in its negotiations shifted the burden of some responsibility onto employees. The retirement plans have a employee contribution and employer contribution. The city has shifted more of its share onto the workers, again, making it a less attractive place to be employed. We've reduced the benefits for new employees. The city took a proactive step and reduced the pension benefits on its own, and then the state did that. So there's basically 3 tiers of pensions in the city right now, each one less than the one prior. Additionally, the financial people told us people said that if you put in money early now, it can reduce the overall payment you have to make. So that investment was made. And the city has worked hard to reduce every single option to reduce the liability that it has. The trouble is you can't walk away from this liability. California law has indicated that the employees' pensions cannot just be taken away. You can reduce new pension, new contract, but you cannot take away a right determined by employment. So the question is, well, could you go bankrupt and get out of this? And several cities have tried that path, and they have not. The courts have held that the thing that doesn't get reduced in those cities' bankruptcies is their pension liability. So basically, paying the pensions off is the first dollar that happens in every budget. It's not a variable. It's not an option. It is just baked into the fundamental cost of doing business with as a city. The city has done everything to minimize it, but it is basic to the operating budget. Again, as I mentioned here, they'll be the next year we'll be already looking at $5 million in the hole. So we need to find that right away for next year. What the financial and operational sustainability study determined is that for a 5-year average here facing forward, the bottom number in this chart, 6.4 million, is just to keep the budget the way it is today. That's $6 million we need just to not cut services in the next couple of years. The study also showed that infrastructure improvements, and there are many that are needed. People clamor about streets, but we need to have in there these fire buildings I mentioned, plus every other aspect of the city that gets overlooked, from the ADA curb ramps we need to the sidewalks, investments in our parks, which have been neglected for years. That is another $4.6 million a year. To begin to address the staff recruitment and retention, they recommend $2 million per year. And then to add the staffing necessary that's been cut so badly is another $2 million there. The recommendation was for $15 million increase in the city budget is what sustainably keeps the city operating. Well, we looked at various funding opportunities, and we looked at, compared to that first column of what we need, the second column is a half cent. And with a half cent, we could keep the budget the same. But we couldn't fix the firehouse, and we couldn't fix the streets, and we couldn't do better at retaining employees. So the city looked at the next option, which is a 1 cent sales tax, which is the one we've ended on. And right now that is projected to yield 13.5 million. That puts us up to most of what it's projected to be a sustainable city operating budget. People have said, well, what else did you look at? The fourth column is the parcel tax. We could look at taking money on a property tax basis, and that was going to be yielding about $2 million, not at all in the neighborhood we need. And we talked about the transportation occupancy, the transient occupancy tax, which is the hotel tax basically, and that would not even put in 1 million. We talked about just bonding, where you take money out of other aspects. This was analyzed at one of the workshops, and it puts 3 million. So none of these do much in the way by themselves. And lastly, the cannabis tax. We have good information from Santa Rosa and Cotati, what cannabis tax yields, and it yields $500,000. Now, none of these other items are to be overlooked, but none of them will in any way hit the magnitude necessary to put the city in a sustainable expenditure footing. The amount of revenue needed to get the city into a sustainable area is this 13 number, which comes from a 1 cent sales tax. The city knew that it doesn't operate in a vacuum in its community and input that brings together people. And so the city started these workshops in person at council meetings or other places, first starting with the goals and priority workshop for the city where people talked about what they really wanted. And then there were parks measure M workshops for that election cycle, and housing workshops, crosstown connector workshops, all in addition to financial workshops that we had. The city is working very hard at trying to engage with the community. And the city used online surveys, and they had over 2,000 respondees on that. And they had 1,000 respondees on old-fashioned paper that were mailed out. So there's just an awful lot of public outreach. Is it enough? Your public outreach is never enough. You know, the answer is you need to just keep talking to people, and more key, you need to keep listening to people. So all these people had their say, and that has all been rolled in to what the city's looking at here. In addition, before the idea of putting something on the ballot, we ran a poll through a research, public opinion research firm, and we had 800 participants in that for what was important to people and whether they would support it. So lots and lots of outreach. The priorities that people tell us on when you talk to them or when they come to meetings is they want to make sure that our emergency services are well funded. They understood that the general fund is the department that funds emergency services. Also, homelessness is becoming more and more of a concern in the community. People want an investment in homelessness prevention programs. And also the street maintenance comes up again and again. I think in Petaluma, if you said you would pave all the potholes, you'd be halfway to getting a council seat. But this is not just for when you say you're going to pave a street, people know that that means that you're improving the bike lanes on that street. You're improving pedestrian facilities. You're providing safe routes to schools for kids. That's why we need to put money into our infrastructure. So the city determined that the tax measure that they wanted to put on the ballot was a 1 cent measure. And this is the text of it. It's estimated to provide $13.5 million a year, and it'll all be spent locally. And one of the other features is it has citizen oversight on it. People are very concerned that money doesn't go where the city didn't indicate it would go. So there will be an oversight committee on that. And that is the key parts of this conversation. And I don't know if everybody loves numbers the way I do, but perhaps more photos and less numbers would be better. Let's have Dave. You tell me, more photos or less or more numbers?
Dave, you're muted. Dave, you're still muted. But I'd go for more numbers.
It's clearly been a bad night for me in computers. So okay, anybody who has questions, we will certainly look for raised hands in a moment. There was one question that came in on chat, which is another way you can ask a question. Barry Busowitz wants to know what effect Prop 15 would have on Petaluma or any other city.
Well, that's a very good question. Thanks for asking that one. I was asked that same question when we went for the endorsement of the North Bay Labor Committee, and all the unions there asked various questions before endorsing our measure, and North Bay Labor has endorsed our measure, and the answer to that is it's projected to bring in $4.7 million to Petaluma. The challenge there is that it's not to the city, it's to city and other needs like schools. Schools are the ones that benefit most from that change. So, but further than just what would the impact be if it passing, the question is, will it pass? And if it does pass, will it become law or will it be litigated? And for the most part, I believe we should try and keep our own destiny in our own hands with our own measure locally. We can hope for things, but right here with this Petaluma measure, we can work for things, we can achieve things.
So side channel that Charlene and I had here was why 1% and not 2%?
Well, it is a challenge to know what the right number is. I think there is something to be said about spending the public's money wisely and getting a track record that shows you've chosen wisely about the projects that need to be done and the staffing that needs to be done. And so 1% gets us sustainable. It brings us back to not quite 2008 for our funding critical services, but it does allow us to put some money into roads. People have been clamoring about roads for a long time, but it's a difficult time to add tax on people. And so, you don't want to ask for too much. People need to know that you're using wisely and you're not taking excess money for excess expense.
There are no other questions in the chat box. If people have not used this feature on Zoom before, at the bottom of the page, you can click on the chat, or you can also click on participants. It gives you a list of everyone in the room. And when you've got that open, there's a place where you can click raise hand, which gives me a hint of who I should be calling on. So either way, the floor is open. Or just raise your voice, it's a small group.
One other comment I have is that 7 of 8 of the city council candidates in this cycle have endorsed this measure. Everyone recognizes that Petaluma has really reduced its expenditures and has limited services now. We can all look at other cities and see things that we need to be moving on, whether they're technological or paving or other services, but all candidates recognize that a 10% cut from where we are today would be devastating.
So we have a suggestion that if you stopped sharing the screen, we could get a gallery view and then see everybody.
Great suggestion.
And I don't know what the recording will do because I'm not used to recording to the cloud, so that may show the gallery there. Although I did hear a thread of more numbers, which I'm okay with you making good on.
Photos.
All right. Well, I do have a few more here. Let's go back to screen share and let's see here. Screen share, and this one. And so another slide that I've not gone to further is overview of street conditions. Here we have. And the streets in Petaluma are categorized by their traffic content, load on them, arterial, collector, etc. And how many are in green, good shape. And this is all the rating that's done by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, the MTC, the Regional Governing Authority, who a lot of money funds through these organizations, the MTC and the Association of Bay Area Governments, ABAG. You'll hear those two acronyms a lot and even interchangeably. They require cities to report their paving index each year. So we know how we've done relative year to year, and we've fallen year to year. A couple of years ago, Larkspur was the worst paved, had the worst paved streets in the whole 9 Bay Area counties. And they passed a local measure strictly for streets, and in a 5-year period, paved every street in Larkspur. That's a different economic constituency than we have. We don't have a hope for that kind of speed to take care of things. But we do hope to be better than where we are. And if you look at this slide, you can see that some of our big streets are in big trouble here. And as they get into other areas, we're dominated by streets that are in the failing category. So this is an indicator. We could zoom in on the city and see where the worst streets are, right? You can tell what's going on. Now, the city has been lucky to pull in grants for paving. So that's outside money, but those don't come by every year. So we need to have a sustained local paving system that pays our fair share of what's going on. I think that's the only other exciting, well, we can talk about where does the general fund get its existing money from, right? This is just the revenue side of the general fund. And if my math is right, that adds us up to $50 million. Yeah, right there, dead center, $50 million. And it's 30 million from taxes. And then these other pieces, a lot of this is economic budget transfers necessary within the city budget to sustain general fund activity. But basically, incoming taxes is $30 million. The sales tax part of that is 13 million. So that's what 1 penny will get on our existing 8 1/4 tax. If you buy something today, 8 1/4, and it will double basically if we add another penny to the tax in there. Property tax side of it is $10 million, almost $11 million here. So those are kind of some of the numbers that the city has to deal with.
Kevin, while you were speaking, another question came in here on the chat. This is from Matthew Ridgway. The list of cities having sales taxes seems to show a pattern of South County cities having sales taxes. Petaluma is the southernmost city in Sonoma County. What are the sales tax rates in Marin County?
Alas, I've not invested heavily in that question, knowing that it is not totally relevant what other people do. What matters is what our sustainable set point is, what services Petalumans want. We know they don't want the worst streets. So we know we do need to move in this direction. We know they don't want lesser safety services. We know we need to move in this direction. If anyone has shopped recently at Costco in Novato, maybe they could weigh in and tell us why their tax dollars went to Novato instead of the Petaluma. But you know, the key, a couple of keys. One is shop local, and two is pay your tax dollars local, and we'll do better on streets. Unless Matthew was going to set us up and tell us what that rate was.
I'm running through the cdtfa.ca.gov list, and unfortunately it shows every city in California, so I have to pick them out. But they're actually pretty low. Novato is 8.5. San Rafael is 9.
So both those higher than Petaluma.
Yeah.
0.5 higher than 8 1/4.
Right.
No, higher than 8 1/4.
Yeah, I don't know what the rates are, but my assumption was that they were also relatively high. So just making the point that as you march north, they probably go down, and Petaluma is the southernmost city, and Sonoma County would be appropriate to have a higher tax rate.
Good question. Thanks.
If I could jump in, Green Bay is 9%, Sausalito is 8.75%, Corte Madera is 9%, which is where the big shopping center is, FYI. Fairfax is 9%, Larkspur's 9%.
San Anselmo's 8 3/4.
Yeah, most of the other ones are 8 1/4, just, you know, without additions. There's a ton of cities in Marin County. Who knew?
13, I think.
No, 23, I think. There's
No,
23 jurisdictions they're giving.
jurisdictions, true. So many of them have local measure improvements. This is another part we haven't talked about. In Marin, there's property tax for fire improvements, things like this, for uh, water service improvements. There's a lot of additional taxes that are encompassed through property, dedicated property down there. And Petaluma is a full service city. And that's what you sometimes forget looking at the other cities that we're comparing with. It's not always apples and apples. Sometimes it's apples and oranges. Like in Roner Park, the fire department is the Rancho Adobe fire system. And there's similarly in Cotati, which already has one of the highest rates, they're not carrying their own fire department there. And even as you go north with Windsor not having a police department, but contracting with the sheriff's department for that service, see, it's very difficult to get apples and apples comparisons between what you're really paying for what you're really getting versus what they're really paying for what they're really getting. All I know is we are at the bottom end of what's being paid, and we're at the bottom end of service performance. So we need to improve.
Barry Buswitz has gone to the chat room and asked, or the chat and asked, what's the next opportunity to do something active to support Measure U? And I know he already has a yard sign, so he wants to go beyond that.
Well, as chair of the Yes on You campaign, anyone, I would love to have people contact me about signs. Signs is our first line. And then in addition to that, we're having a walking day where we are delivering doorstep materials to people. And then even weighing in on our Facebook page with ideas. And it really comes down to a campaign where you tell a friend. If you can be an effective spokesperson to share the city's open communication campaign with each person who perhaps hasn't been as involved as you or hasn't had a chance to see the numbers that the city's been putting out to explain the case, person-to-person communication is very, very valuable. So either contact me for either signs and walking materials or tell a friend.
Well, by golly, Kevin, when is that walking day?
The walking day is this Saturday, and the best way to get a hold of me is through email, and my email is kevin-mcd@comcast.net, and we'll have plenty of precincts ready for you if you're available to help. And if in your email you want to tell me your favorite neighborhood, we can arrange to have that precinct for your favorite neighborhood.
And your email address is now also up on the chat function. So anybody who missed it, it's available there.
Thank you, Dave.
Are there any other questions?
I have another opportunity for those who are really zealous or energetic, which is a letter to the editor of either the Argus or the PD. I realize the PD doesn't run as many letters from Petaluma, but if we could get a letter in there, those would both be very positive for the community.
Actually, I can give you a little update on that. I did exchange emails with Matt Brown earlier this week. He has a full queue of letters through Election Day, but he's willing to squeeze in something on Measure U if it comes in. So he's looking to get the message out there. And I'll be submitting my own letter in a couple of days.
So think about the Press Democrat as well. And the other thing I should note is that the Argus has been a supporter of this and has endorsed this. And so one of the quotes that we'll see on a flyer that's coming out from the campaign is the Argus is quoted as saying that city leaders have been good stewards of the city budget, and it's time to start bringing money back to them. I think it shows a real change in tone of the relationship between the city council, and the public via the print media, that that it's time that all the cuts that could be made have been made, and it's time to start improving service.
Any further questions?
Remember, you can get a sign from Kevin.
And again, Kevin, I do apologize for the mistake on the Zoom link. I'll chat with you about if there's something we can do to make that right for you. So,
Remember, we'll have this on YouTube in no time, and we can forward that YouTube link to people. And if you see it on YouTube, you can like it. And that way, everybody in the world will know that you live in Petaluma and support improved services. Thanks for hosting, Dave.
hey, glad you made time for this, Kevin. Much appreciated. And those of you who were able to find your way here, thank you very much. Hope to see most of you back again next Wednesday to talk about cooperative housing in Petaluma. Thanks for coming.
Good night, everybody.
Night. And with that, I will stop recording.